It's time to huddle up, football fans, and welcome into the Hard Count Podcast, Episode 6. As always, I am your host, Anthony Galler, and thank you again for joining me today on another edition of the Hard Count Podcast. We are actually going to be starting a special series in the Hard Count Podcast, as of course we gear up for the upcoming 2020 NFL season. We're now in mid-June, and we are inching closer and closer to the hopeful beginning of the NFL season in September. So I'm going to be starting a special edition of the Hard Count Podcast, special series, in fact, of the Hard Count Podcast, beginning with today's episode. And what I'm going to be doing is I am going to be conducting NFL redrafts. Yeah, it's one of my favorite exercises to do, actually, so go back and look at redrafts from prior years and try to figure out what teams would do if they were given the opportunity to do it all over again. So in this series, I'm going to look back at the past 5 NFL drafts, not including this year, of course, but the past 5 NFL drafts ranging from 2015 to 2019, and I will do a redraft of the top 10 selections. Yes, just the top 10, but the top 10 selections from each of those 5 drafts. So that is what I'm going to be starting with today, and we're going to kick things off with the 2019 NFL drafts. We're going to work back, actually. We're going to work back starting today with the 2019 NFL draft a year ago, work our way back to 2015. But before I get that started today, we did have major breaking injury news a couple of days ago. And throughout this series, if we do have significant injury news, trade news, free agency news, I'll be sure to cover that before getting into my redraft for the day. So it was announced on Monday that Eagles Pro Bowl guard, one of the best guards in the NFL, in fact, Brandon Brooks, he is going to miss the entirety of the 2020 NFL season due to a torn left Achilles. So I don't need to tell Eagles fans this, but this is obviously a humongous blow for one of the top contenders in the NFC this season. Brandon Brooks, as I mentioned, he's not only one of the best guards on the Philadelphia Eagles, but he's a Pro Bowler. He's one of the best guards in the game of football. Last year, in fact, he had a PFF grade that was north of 90, which is extremely impressive. One of the highest PFF grades of any player, regardless of position, last season. So Brandon Brooks is going to be missing the entirety of the regular season this year with that torn left Achilles. A huge loss for Philadelphia. And like I already mentioned, a team that finds itself as being one of the 3 or 4 teams that should be in the driver's seat to potentially win this NFC conference and advance to the Super Bowl. And of course, Philadelphia Eagles. And again, I'm sure Eagles fans don't want me to get too far into it, but this is a team that has just been ravaged by injuries really across the board the past handful of years. And, it really starts with Carson Wentz. And he's the guy that we, of course, have a microscope on because he is the quarterback. He is the Pro Bowl level quarterback who, was well on his way to an MVP season a couple of seasons ago. But it's just really been a variety of positions for Philadelphia, aside from Carson Wentz. It's been last year. You think about just all of the injuries that they sustained at the wide receiver position. At the end of the season, they were down to Greg Ward and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside as their top 2 receivers. This team has had significant injuries going back the past few years on the defensive line, on their offensive line. They've had injuries in the secondary, multiple injuries in the secondary last year, in fact, and going back a couple of years as well. So this Philadelphia team, again, I don't have to go too far into it. Eagles fans know the story, but this is a team that has just been ravaged by injuries across the board, really, for the past handful of years. And, of course, it all starts with Carson Wentz, and he's the guy that we, again, have that microscope on because he is the quarterback. But Brandon Brooks, you can't understate this loss for Philadelphia going into the season. And even if the season is delayed a little bit, we're gonna find out, as we go into the coming weeks here, we're gonna find out really if the NFL is able to stay on track for the beginning of their season. But even if it is delayed a few weeks, this is an injury that, of course, is going to keep him out for the entirety of the season no matter what. So this is a huge loss for Philadelphia. It's a huge loss, I think, for Carson Wentz as well, because he is a guy who has had injury concerns. We know that to be true. He's a guy who needs to be well protected. And so Philadelphia's offensive line, I think, is still a strength for them, even without Brooks. However, there's no denying how big of a loss this is. Again, a guy who had a PFF grade north of 90 last year, but this is going to be a big setback for him. I think it's a big setback for the Philadelphia Eagles team. And of course, we are just in June right now. We haven't even started the preseason. So there's no telling what else could happen from here. But clearly not good news on the NFL front, especially on the Philadelphia Eagle front with Brandon Brooks going down for the entirety of the season. So I did want to mention that before getting into my redraft today, because that is major breaking injury news. And again, for the next 5 weeks or so while I do this redraft series, I will, of course, mention breaking injury news that is really significant, trade news, if we have trade news, Yannick Ngakoue, guys like that, free agency news. We still have the Jadeveon Clowneys of the world out there, Cam Newton, Everson Griffin. So those guys getting signed, I'll mention that as well. But for today, we're going to now jump into things. We're going to start with the 2019 NFL draft. And again, we're going to do the top 10 picks in that draft. I'm going to redraft them right now for you. We're going to see which of these teams would stick with their original decisions and which of these teams would really change things up. So we're going to start with, of course, the team that had the number 1 selection in the draft in 2019, and that was the Arizona Cardinals. They selected Kyler Murray, and today, if they had to do it all over again, they would do the exact same thing. So that would be my pick. Kyler Murray, once again, the number 1 pick in my redraft here. Look, I was a skeptic of this move at the time that it happened. I really was. I didn't understand why the Cardinals would bail on Josh Rosen so early in the process. I didn't think it was wise for them to go out and get another quarterback when they had other team needs at the time, and they still do. But I've been proven wrong, completely wrong. In fact, Kyler Murray was fantastic a year ago, rookie of the year. Maybe he won't blow you away in terms of the touchdown numbers. He threw 20 touchdowns. But he did complete 64% of his passes, which is awesome as a rookie. Took care of the football for the most part. He played every game, only threw 12 interceptions, which for a rookie, who plays all 16 games, that's really not bad. That's really not bad at all. Only 12 interceptions. A lot of guys will be in the neighborhood of 20 or so interceptions in their rookie season. So I think 12 for Kyler Murray, that's a pretty fair number. So he protected the football well. And of course, he is the dual threat as well. He may not be Lamar Jackson. He's not going to be a guy who will go over 1,000 rushing yards from the quarterback position. But he did manage to have 544 rushing yards last year, which is still really good. He did add 4 rushing touchdowns, so 20 through the air and then 4 on the ground for Kyler Murray, 24 total touchdowns. Again, I was wrong. I really thought that this was kind of a strange move for Arizona. Cliff Kingsbury coming in year 1. I felt like they would stick with Josh Rosen. I didn't really understand why they wouldn't. I know he was really bad in that first year with Arizona. I know that he didn't play well at all, but I just felt like they'd give him another year. They'd give him another couple of years, and they bailed on him right away. I think it was definitely a gutsy move from Cliff Kingsbury in that franchise. But 1 year in, hey, we have a long ways to go. But 1 year in, it's worked out for him. Kyler Murray, great season, rookie season from him. That's why he won Rookie of the Year. So again, if the Arizona Cardinals had to do it all over again, they'd be taking Murray number 1, no doubt about it. Number 2 now would be San Francisco. Of course, the team that was in the Super Bowl last year, but before the year started, you never would have predicted that. They had the number 2 pick in the 2019 draft. They ended up going with Nick Bosa, and once again, that would be the same selection for them as well. So the first 2 selections off the board would be the exact same. And look, I think you can certainly make an argument that maybe going forward, if you look back at their careers eventually, and you say who was maybe the best player who came out of this draft, you might say Nick Bosa. I mean, he was that impressive last year. You might say Nick Bosa was the best pure talent and the best pure player that came out of this draft. But I do think Arizona would go with Murray number 1 like they did. And I think San Francisco, they'd be very happy to take Nick Bosa at number 2 again. He had 9 sacks a year ago, a forced fumble, 1 interception. Look, he was playing on a pretty loaded defensive front for the San Francisco 49ers. I think you could easily argue you put him on a different team where he had to really be the main guy and really kind of pull the weight for everybody else on that line. I think his sack numbers would have been, even higher than they were. But still, as a rookie, 9 sacks, forced a fumble, interception. He, in the 3 49er playoff games, he had a total of 4 sacks in those 3 games. Also forced a fumble in the Super Bowl against Kansas City. He was the best player for the 49ers in that Super Bowl. If San Francisco had ended up winning the game, I think him and Deebo Samuel, those were really the 2 guys when I was watching that Super Bowl. Those were really the 2 guys who jumped off the screen for me, and I thought they were the best 2 players in that Super Bowl for San Francisco. So Nick Bosa was tremendous last year. had a PFF grade of 86.7, which, look, that type of grade, that high of a grade, for a player who's been in the league 5 or 6 years, that would be really impressive. I'd be very impressed with that type of grade. But for a rookie to come into the league and make an immediate impact with an 86.7 grade, he was tremendous. I mean, there's not much else to say about Nick Bosa. I think this is a guy who, you're going to look back 8 to 10 years from now, and you're going to say, yeah, he was one of the best pass rushers in the game of football over the past 8 to 10 years. So San Francisco, look, they would be thrilled to get him again at number 2 in this redraft. They absolutely would. He was one of the best defenders, I think, really in the game of football last year, regardless of, rookie status or whatever. I think he was just one of the best defenders in football last year entirely. And again, he proved it in the playoffs too. 4 sacks in those 3 games, forced a fumble in the Super Bowl. He was all over the place. So San Francisco, number 2 pick, they would once again, I believe, take Nick Bosa in that spot. Now, with the number 3 pick, the New York Jets. Now, this is where we're going to get our first little change up here. So they originally went with Quinnen Williams out of Alabama, and he did a nice job for them last year. I don't think he played poorly at all. I think he did a nice job for them on that defensive line as a run stuffer, plugging up holes in the run game, helping out in run support in a big way. So I think he did a really nice job for New York. But I do believe that if the Jets had to do it all over again, even though that they're happy with Quinnen Williams, I believe, after year 1, I think of a guy like Josh Allen. And of course, I'm not talking about Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills, but I'm talking about the Josh Allen out of Kentucky originally who went to Jacksonville. Because I think the Jets really, they have multiple areas where I think they really need a little bit of a revamp in order to actually compete moving forward. But I do think for the Jets, if they were able to secure a high-end pass rusher who can make the quarterback uncomfortable, and this is a division, look, young quarterbacks in this division. Of course, we got Tua coming in this year. Maybe Fitzpatrick will start the year, but Tua is going to play at some point. Jarrett Stidham taking over for Tom Brady. Josh Allen, the other Josh Allen, of course. This is a division where I think if you can get some pressure on these young quarterbacks, you're going to find a lot of success because, they're inexperienced. These are young guys, inexperienced. I like Josh Allen, the quarterback. I think he's improved his first couple of years in the league, and I'm excited about him. But you could still definitely get to him at this point, rattle him. I think you could probably rattle Tua, especially coming off the injury. Jarrett Stidham's young, going to be starting for the first time in his career. So to get a guy like Josh Allen, last year for Jacksonville, he got 10.5 sacks. He forced 2 fumbles for the Jags. He was really one of the lone bright spots, really, on a team that is kind of just searching for talent at this point. They've sold off a lot of different pieces. A couple of guys who are still on the team who we think may not be on the team very long, guys like Leonard Fournette and Yannick Ngakoue as well. But, Josh Allen, he was one of the few lone bright spots for this Jacksonville team last year on the defensive side of the ball. And I think for New York to be able to grab him at number 3, not saying they aren't happy with Quinnen Williams. I think he did a good job for them last year. But Josh Allen, to be able to get to these young quarterbacks, create a little bit of chaos, create a little bit of fear in these young quarterbacks, I think it'd be a perfect match for New York. So then, on to pick number 4 for my redraft. We would have, of course, at the time, it was the Oakland Raiders. Now, if they were redrafting today, they'd be the Las Vegas Raiders. They would be going with, I think it would be tough between Josh Jacobs and the guy I actually picked. Oakland ended up getting Josh Jacobs later in the draft a year ago. And I think that there's an argument that you could put them with Josh Jacobs now in this redraft. But the guy I went with, because I always feel like if you're telling me you can choose between the stud running back and the stud wide receiver, I'm going to take the stud wide receiver 9 out of 10 times these days, unless you're talking about like a Christian McCaffrey type of player, because in today's NFL, being that it's a passing league, being that it's a quarterback league, and increasingly it's less of a running back league, I'm going to take the wide receiver 9 out of 10 times over the running back. So with this selection here at number 4, I got Las Vegas taking A.J. Brown. And, A.J. Brown last year for Tennessee was tremendous. And he really made a late push for Rookie of the Year. I think the first half of the year, he was doing all right. He was hanging around. You heard about A.J. Brown a little bit. But, this Tennessee offense, it went through Derrick Henry. It didn't go through the passing game. But nonetheless, even though even though A.J. Brown only had 52 receptions last year, which is not a ton, he still managed to go north of 1,000 yards. He had 1,051 receiving yards. He had 8 touchdowns for a team that did not have a lot of touchdowns through the air. Again, this was a team, offensively ground and pound with Derrick Henry. But A.J. Brown, nonetheless, still managed to reel in 8 touchdowns for this team, 1,051 yards, as I mentioned. He had a 20.2 yards per catch, which was actually second best in the NFL. It's crazy. Only Mike Williams of the Chargers had a better yards per catch average than A.J. Brown. So he was a big playmaker. He was a big playmaker for Tennessee all season long. And again, he really did come on late, especially though. I remember I had him in fantasy at the end of the year, picked him off waivers, maybe week 9 or 10. And for the rest of the season, he was tremendous. And, if he was on a team where they were airing out the football, put him on a team like Kansas City with Pat Mahomes. If he's on a team like that that's airing out the football, he would have had exceptional rookie season. That being said, he still did have over 1,000 yards. So I think to add him in this redraft, to add him to Vegas, pair him with Derek Carr, a guy who, he's not Pat Mahomes where he's airing it out to that extent, but I think he does like to air it out a little bit more than Ryan Tannehill will. So you pair him with Derek Carr and really just bolster this Las Vegas offense, because right now Las Vegas, again, they brought in Antonio Brown. We know what happened with that. So right now they've got Tyrell Williams as really their number one target. They got Hunter Renfrow, who did a good job for them, rookie out of Clemson. But, A.J. Brown, this is a guy you can line up on the outside. Again, he's going to run past you. He's strong. He's physical. And reeled in 8 touchdowns for a team that doesn't even throw the ball that much. So red zone target as well. I think he'd be a perfect match for Las Vegas in this redraft. Number 5, Tampa Bay. They originally selected Devon White out of LSU. And I believe that they would stick with that selection. I believe that they would stick with Devon White in this redraft. Devon White did a really great job for Tampa Bay last year. He was all over the field. He totaled 91 tackles altogether. And he really just filled up the stat sheet. He did a little bit of everything that you would want a linebacker to do. He had 2.5 sacks. He had 3 forced fumbles. And he had an interception as well. So again, just across the board, he did a little bit of everything that you would want from a linebacker. Did a really nice job in that Tampa defense. I'm excited about this kid going forward. I'm excited about him going into this season. I think he's going to grow. I think he's going to continue to get better. Those instincts, those linebacker instincts, I think will continue to improve for him. We played against the best of the best in the SEC, of course. And now, this division is just super, super interesting now with Tom Brady coming over. And look, really, this Tampa defense, everybody's going to be super excited about this offense, right? With Tom Brady coming in, Chris Godwin, who was awesome a year ago, Mike Evans, we know what he's about, Bruce Arians at the helm. Everybody's going to be super excited about this Tampa offense, but don't sleep on this defense. Don't sleep on it. This Tampa defense, their defensive line last year was spectacular. They were one of the best rush defenses in the NFL a year ago. I still have some questions what they're going to do in the secondary. I don't love Tampa at corner. I think that there will be games this season where Tampa will get into shootouts because they are not particularly strong at the cornerback position. But I love their defensive line. They've got some nice linebackers, and Devon White is one of them. And again, he was really, really good last year in his rookie season. He's just going to continue to get better. I think he's going to continue to fill up the stat sheet for Tampa Bay. And, I think Tampa Bay overall, this is a team that you should be excited about if you're a fan. If you're just a football fan, honestly. In my life, I'm 21, going to be 22 soon. But in my life, Tampa is one of the few teams, like one of the very few teams, because the NFL is just, the parity of the league is just so amazing. And, teams can go from worst to first and then vice versa, first to worst, every year. And I think that's what makes the sport so great. But Tampa's one of the few teams really, them, Cleveland, maybe a couple others that I've just really not seen had very much success. I think Tampa made the playoffs like once that I can remember. I think it was like in the Josh Freeman era, actually. But I really don't remember Tampa making much noise ever. So I'm really excited about this Tampa team. Devon White's going to be one of the reasons why. So I think in this redraft, Tampa, if they had to do it again, Devon White would be the pick once again. Number 6 would be the New York Giants. And I know kind of repeating myself here, but I think they would stick with their pick as well. I really do. They ended up going with Daniel Jones, and I don't see any reason as to why they wouldn't do that now. Daniel Jones, look, he, unlike Kyler Murray, he played in 13 games last year. So he didn't play in 3 games. He didn't play the entirety of the season, played about 75, 80% of it. But I loved what I saw from Daniel Jones. Look, he, in 13 games, so in less games than Kyler Murray played, he actually threw more touchdowns, 24 touchdowns. So he almost averaged 2 touchdowns per game, which I think is really good for a rookie, especially. Completed 62% of his throws. So, just a tick lower than what Murray was at last year for Arizona. I think the biggest concern for Daniel Jones is just ball security. He also threw 12 touchdowns, as Kyler Murray did as well. But Daniel Jones, too many fumbles, 12 fumbles, not good. Has to work on that. You can't, protecting the football, that's one of the first rules. That might be, quarterbacking 101 really, is just protect the football. Don't let the other team get easy points on the scoreboard. I mean, just by turning over the football too many times. The number of interceptions doesn't alarm me too much. He was basically at 1 per game, which I think for a rookie quarterback, that's about what you expect. Like I said a few minutes ago, I think for a rookie quarterback, you probably, if they play all 16 games, you're thinking to yourself anywhere from 15 to 20 interceptions. That's just how it goes. But I think Daniel Jones, he's got a little bit of mobility as well. He's certainly not Kyler Murray, and he's not a Lamar Jackson either. But he did have 279 rushing yards, so he knows how to get out of the pocket and run at least a little bit. But I was very impressed with him. Some weeks, there were a few weeks where he really looked bad. I remember the New England game. I think that was a Thursday night game. He looked really bad. That New England defense last year was awesome and really gave Daniel Jones fits. But then Daniel Jones had other games. I remember, again, the Tampa game very early on. He had other games where he was slinging 3-4 touchdowns. I think he might have had either 3 or 4 separate games last year where he had at least 3 passing touchdowns, which is really impressive as a rookie. So Daniel Jones, look, just work on that ball security, I think, for him. And the other thing about Daniel Jones, too, is that you have to remember, this is a guy who last year, Sterling Shepard missed a lot of time for the Giants with concussion issue. Saquon Barkley missed a handful of games. Evan Ingram missed several games with a foot issue. So this is a team that didn't have their weapons from start to finish throughout the entire season. But Daniel Jones, he was throwing to Golden Tate a lot. He was throwing to Darius Slayton a lot. And he made it work for the most part. He made it work. I was impressed. Certainly didn't expect it from him coming out of Duke. I really didn't see, him or Kyler Murray having the success that they did. But very impressed with Daniel Jones. And I think if the Giants had an opportunity to do it all over again, they would select Daniel Jones again. So number 7, now we have the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now originally the Jacksonville Jaguars, as I mentioned when I went back to the Jets pick at 3, they took Josh Allen. Jacksonville did. But in this redraft, Josh Allen would be off the board. He would be going to the New York Jets. So in this redraft, the Jacksonville Jaguars would have to find the next best thing, the next best prospect on the defensive side of the football. And I think that would be Devin Bush. Devin Bush, I was very impressed with him for Pittsburgh last year. This is a guy who had 109 total tackles, 72 solo tackles. And, he did a little bit of filling up the stat sheet as well. He had 1 sack. He had 1 forced fumble. He had 2 interceptions for Pittsburgh a year ago. And, Pittsburgh last year had so many different pieces on the defensive side of the football who really impressed me. You think TJ Watt is probably the one guy who stands out the most in your mind. But Pittsburgh had several different young players who really stood out to me on the defensive side of the football last year. Devin Bush being one of them as well. These guys really kept Pittsburgh in the playoff hunt. It certainly wasn't their offense. It certainly wasn't Mason Rudolph or Duck Hodges. James Conner was banged up all season long. Juju Smith-Schuster, he was either kind of ineffective due to quarterback play or he was banged up as well. So it was the defensive pieces, the young defensive pieces that kept Pittsburgh in games, kept Pittsburgh in the playoff hunt. Devin Bush was absolutely 100% one of those handful of guys. So I think Jacksonville in this spot, again, they were thrilled to get Josh Allen at pick number 7 last year in the real draft. But in this situation with Josh Allen off the board at number 3 with the Jets, they would have to look at what the next best thing for them would be on the defensive side of the football. And I think that would really be Devin Bush. Again, a tackling machine, over 100 total tackles. He did have 2 interceptions. He did force a fumble. He had a sack. So, Devin Bush did a little bit of everything as well. So I think for Jacksonville, of course, Josh Allen is the prize that they are happy that they got. But in this redraft, I think that Devin Bush would be an excellent consolation prize for the Jaguars at pick number 7. Pick number 8, the Detroit Lions. Now, the Detroit Lions, they originally went with TJ Hawkinson at pick number 8, the tight end out of Iowa. Not a good pick. 1 year in, maybe it's a little premature to say that. And, we'll see what TJ Hawkinson ends up becoming. But I'm just not a big believer in taking a tight end in the top 10. Everybody says, don't take a running back in the top 10. It's not worth it anymore. It's not a running back league. Don't do that. You're going to waste your money. You're going to waste a resource by taking a running back in the top 10. That's what everybody says. And I think you could probably say that for a tight end too, if I'm being honest. Rob Gronkowski was not a first-round draft pick. George Kittle, who I think, for my money, is the best tight end in the game of football today. He was a 5th-round pick for San Francisco a few seasons ago. So, I don't believe in taking a tight end this high. And I do think TJ Hawkinson will actually turn into a pretty nice player. I do believe that to be true. He played an excellent week 1 last year against Arizona, in fact. And, of course, part of the reason why Hawkinson maybe struggled later in the year was, of course, the quarterback play, Stafford being out for the second half of the season. But nonetheless, I think this is a Detroit team. If they had to do it all over again, Detroit's got some nice wide receivers. They do need a tight end, but I think more importantly for them, if they had to do it all over again, I think a defensive line presence would be huge for them. I think, they need to put the D back in Detroit. And that's something we haven't seen from the Detroit Lions, certainly last year. They have a defensive-minded head coach now. So, I think that Detroit, if they could do it all over again, I look at a guy like Ed Oliver. Ed Oliver, who originally went to Buffalo with pick number 9, in fact. So I'm just going to move him up one selection and give him to the Lions at number 8. And Ed Oliver played really well for Buffalo last year. And he was a part of a stacked defensive line, in fact. This defensive line for Buffalo had a lot of talent. So I think if you put Ed Oliver on a team like Detroit, which has less talent on their defensive line, I think he would stand out even more than he did. And he played well. He had 5 sacks a year ago for Buffalo. He had a forced fumble. He was good against the run as well. He had, a respectable PFF grade. I know it doesn't jump off the page to you, but a respectable PFF grade of 65.6, which again, for a rookie, I think, that's not bad. That's not bad. He wasn't awful. He did have 5 sacks, so he proved that he could get a little bit of pressure on the quarterback as well, which is always important. You don't just want that from your edge rushers. Of course, those are the guys you expect it from, but you don't just want that from your edge rushers. So it was nice to see Ed Oliver get 5 sacks on the quarterback a year ago. And I think, again, for Detroit, Hawkinson, we'll see what he ends up becoming. I think he'll end up being a pretty decent tight end in this league. I do like his skill set. I just don't think you take a tight end at number 8. And I think Ed Oliver would be a much better selection for Detroit if they had to do it all over again. And so that would be the pick. Now, number 9, the Buffalo Bills. Now, again, Ed Oliver now off the board for them in this redraft, so they can't go with him. But, the Bills took a leap of faith, I think, earlier in this offseason, going back to March, going back to the free agency period, in fact, when they made a trade. And they surrendered 4 draft picks for Stephon Diggs. Now, I like Stephon Diggs a lot. I do. I think he's a really nice receiver. I think that he'll do a great job in Buffalo this season with Josh Allen. And I'm excited to see what that combo can do out in Buffalo this season. But, what if Buffalo didn't have to surrender 4 draft picks for a really nice receiver? That would probably be preferable. So I think that, maybe Stephon Diggs, again, he's a guy who I think most would agree is probably a top 15 receiver right now. But what if Buffalo did not have to give up any draft picks and instead, with the number 9 selection in this redraft, they could go with a guy like DK Metcalf. And DK Metcalf was a guy who was really slept on a year ago. Seattle took a chance on him. He looked like just coming out of college. And again, he, along with A.J. Brown, a couple of Ole Miss guys. So, in fact, it's kind of interesting. But he just looked like a bodybuilder, in fact. He was just ripped. He was shredded. Not a precise route runner, not a great route runner. But DK Metcalf, very impressed with what he did last year with Seattle. And, part of that is Russell Wilson, because Russell Wilson is magical and he makes it work with a lot of guys. So maybe DK Metcalf wouldn't have found as much success with Josh Allen in Buffalo if, that's actually the pairing that had happened. So, maybe it wouldn't have been as great of a rookie season. But I do think, just based off what I saw, I do think DK Metcalf is a big playmaker. I'm very impressed by him. He's definitely more than just a bodybuilder. So, DK Metcalf last year for Seattle, again, another guy out of Ole Miss, just like A.J. Brown. I think they have some similarities. DK Metcalf, 900 receiving yards, so about 150 receiving yards less than A.J. Brown, his former teammate, but still really good, 900 yards. He had 7 touchdowns. He also had an awesome performance in the Seattle Seahawks wild card playoff game at Philadelphia, where he had, I believe it was 160 total receiving yards. He had a long touchdown in that game, which proved to be the difference in the game, in fact. So he was great in that game for Seattle. He was great all year for Seattle, in fact. I would say the one thing, if I'm looking at DK Metcalf, the one thing that concerns me a little, and I'd say, yeah, you need to work on that, would be he did fumble 3 times. He did lose 3 fumbles. So that, again, ball security. I talked a little bit about it with Daniel Jones and the Giants, but for DK Metcalf, 3 fumbles lost, too many fumbles lost. Need to work on that ball security. I think for a wide receiver, you really don't want to lose more than 1 fumble per year. Obviously 0 would be great, and that's what you prefer, but really 1 fumble lost is all you want for the entire season. So DK Metcalf had a few too many fumbles, but I think if he can work on that, really impressed with what he did last year with Seattle. And I think, in this redraft, Buffalo could take him at pick number 9, and then they wouldn't have to surrender 4 draft picks for Stephon Diggs a year later. And finally, selection number 10. This was originally last year the Pittsburgh Steelers draft pick, but it was traded to them by the Denver Broncos. Now, I think in this redraft, Denver would keep their draft pick at number 10, and they would end up selecting a guy who they did ultimately get on their team a lot later on, pick number 42, but that would be Drew Locke, quarterback Drew Locke, who will be the quarterback of this team going forward, going into this season. He'll be the starter. And Drew Locke, what's there to say? He didn't have a large sample size. He didn't, because unfortunately it took John Elway and it took that Broncos franchise a little too long to figure out that Drew Locke was the guy, and it wasn't Joe Flacco anymore. But nonetheless, Drew Locke eventually got his real chance to show what he could do for this Denver team. And in 5 games last season, he was really good. He threw 7 touchdowns. He completed 64% of his passes. He did have good ball security as well. He was better in terms of ball security than Daniel Jones was, for sure. Only 3 interceptions. Now, of course, there's a lot smaller sample size. I recognize that. But only 3 interceptions in those 5 games. And, this guy's got a cannon. He's got a great arm. I think for Denver in that altitude, where the weather can be, sketchy sometimes. It can get snowy. It can get windy. I think having a strong arm is key. Drew Locke absolutely has a cannon. So that's exciting if you're a Denver Broncos fan. And, most importantly, maybe, is the fact that in those 5 games, he went 4-1. He went 4-1 for this team. Denver played a lot better down the stretch with him at the helm. And in fact, the only game that Denver lost going down the stretch was to Kansas City in Kansas City, in Arrowhead, which is a pretty difficult game to win no matter what your name is at quarterback. So Drew Locke, very impressed with him. I think that, Denver is extremely happy that he fell into their laps, later in the draft at pick number 42. But if given the chance to do it all over again, I think that they would not even want to worry about that. Of course, Drew Locke would come off the board a lot earlier if they did a redraft today. And so Denver at pick number 10, they would not want to trade that pick. They'd want to go with the guy they currently have now. That's Drew Locke in the quarterback position. So to summarize it, I have four selections in total that would be the same as they were at the time of the draft. And that is Kyler Murray at number 1, Nick Bosa at number 2 to San Francisco, Devon White with Tampa at number 5, and Daniel Jones for the Giants at number 6. I think all those teams are happy with the production they've gotten from those players after 1 year. And I think today, if they did it again, they would stick with their picks. So overall, for my redraft, my 2019 redraft top 10, I would have Kyler Murray number 1, Nick Bosa 2, Josh Allen 3, A.J. Brown 4, Devon White at 5, Daniel Jones 6, Devin Bush at 7, Ed Oliver 8, DK Metcalf at 9, and then Drew Locke at number 10. So that's going to sum up my 2019 NFL redraft. And again, next week, I'll start working backwards. So next week, it'll be the 2018 NFL redraft. But I want you to comment below. If you think I've left anybody out that I clearly should have included in my top 10, if you think I made any big mistakes, if you think that any of my picks were insane, or if you think I was even, if I was accurate about something, if you wanted to say that you agree with something, just comment below. Let me know how I did on my 2019 NFL redraft. But that's going to do it for me today on the Hard Count Podcast. I want to thank you again for listening. I want to remind you to subscribe as well. Hit that subscribe button. Now, next time, again, I will be going over any breaking news that we have on the NFL front, and I will then dive into my 2018 NFL redraft top 10 picks. So next time, it'll be the Hard Count Podcast, episode 7. So I'll see you from the gridiron. Take care, and I'll see you next time.